Luis, you did a very good job there. I know that. Our most dapper alderman, for sure.
related to the special service area include sanitary, sewer, water, road installation, land acquisition for the road, and right-of-way landscaping. And all the funds for these improvements are generated through the bond issuance, which takes us to the next slide, which is a little hard to read, but I'm speaking about what we're looking at. So how does that SSA get funded? Through this approval process, the city would approve the issuance of the bonds. William Blair would find a buyer for the bonds, and upon the closing of the bond sale, the proceeds are deposited into an escrow account, and the escrow account is monitored by a trustee. The trustee then holds the funds until the improvements are constructed and there's a need to pay for the construction. Trustee is presumably someone that's agreed to by all the parties, and I know that the city has people that they've used in the past. As I said, the SSA and the development agreement provides that the bond issuance covers all of the costs of the infrastructure, which takes us to the next slide. Actually, it's the prior slide. I didn't know you put them both on there. How does the infrastructure get paid for? Well, there's a developer agreement that allows the developer to construct the public improvements on behalf of the city. And just like any other development in the city, the developer would contract with a general contractor. That contractor would have subcontractors with individual trades that would perform the work. The city would have the obligation to inspect and approve the work as it progresses. And just like any construction draw you might have in a residential project with a title company or something, the general contractor would submit their request for payment for the trades work to the trustee, and upon the approval of all of the city, the trustee would release the funds for those individual trades. The flip side of the organization is then how does the interest and the principal payments get paid to the bondholders? The trustee agreement allows that the trustee would then pay predetermined interest and principal to the bondholders. See if I'm on the right page here. Right, so then where does that money come from? Well, the trustee pays the bondholders in a couple ways. Prior to the lot sales, the trustee pays from the bond sale proceeds. It's built into the original sale. It's capitalized, I think it's 2 years, perhaps 3. But I think it's 2 years. But eventually those bonds will be retired upon each sale of the developing lot. A portion of the debt is paid by the individual lot closings, and that amount that's due is determined by a special tax consultant that's hired by William Blair.
Is that a change? Because I had thought when we had first talked about this, you were not going to do that you were going to leave it outstanding and just add it to the property tax bill.
Yeah, that is a change, and there are a couple different ways you can do it. You can put it out on the property tax bill and pay it over a number of years. I think that with paying it down immediately, it makes it a less risky proposition for the investors, the bond investors. And it's been through our work with William Blair and the city and Laura Bilas that we've moved towards that other way of funding it. If there are more specific questions about that, we do have people from Blair and Laura. But you are correct. That is different.
As a follow-up to that, we have this proposing ordinance back in front of us again because apparently there were some changes to the terms, but it's not clear to me how the new proposing ordinance really differs from the original one. Maybe that's for staff to answer or something, but I don't know if you know.
Well, I think that the mechanics of the ordinance are the same, but the terms are what the potential interest and the total amounts were increased, which required a new notice and new proposing ordinance.
And that's correct. The ordinance, if you did a compare right, you'd see it's almost identical except for a couple of the numbers have been adjusted.
So after 2 years, any unsold lots, is the interest on those lots paid for by the developer?
That takes us to our next
Okay,
question.
sorry.
Because the question becomes, what happens if the developer doesn't sell the lots? If everything works out and the lots are sold, they get paid down, everything's the way that it is intended. If he doesn't sell any lots or enough lots, there's a couple things that happen. The developer becomes responsible for the annual tax payments on the unsold lots. And in the event that he's unable to make payments, then eventually the bond issue could be in default. That's a risk, though, that's carried solely by the bondholder, and the city doesn't have any liability for those payments. So I don't know if that answers that question, Mr. Grumhouse, but a related question I've heard is, what happens if the improvements haven't been completed? And in our case, I think that we go back and remember that all of the improvements are fully funded by the initial bond issuance. So that risk really doesn't exist. It's not as if we have improvements that are partially funded by the bond and partially funded by private equity. So the infrastructure is the first thing in, and
So
I
there's no general obligation on this,
To the city.
correct.
right?
But would it be a reflection on the creditability of the city if the bonds are in default?
Well, I don't know the answer to whether or not it would, the credit issue. Perhaps Laura does, or Mr. Chuck
Let
does.
me offer a couple of first words on that, and then I'll invite Mr. Freeberg or Ms. Bilas to speak. It is not something which is in our full faith and credit. It does not go against our legal indebtedness. How it might be perceived by the credit markets is something for the credit markets to determine, but it's not something which is a city debt per se. It is a debt of the special service area only, although we are the issuer
Right.
of that debt.
So there could be a risk in perception, but not a liability.
Just adding to that, then could you, if the developer doesn't sell any of the lots, I'm saying zero,
Right.
and the infrastructure has been improved, could you force then the developer to sell the land to try to get that money back?
Sure, I think that the
all
developer
the
and everybody
infrastructure's done.
involved would be interested in figuring out how to help pay down that initial amount. And it's important to know that the holders of the bond have first position even ahead of the other financing.
What's the advantage to this over conventional loan? Going to the bank, getting it, taking the, making the payments,
Well-
everything, and not having the city involved, is it the interest rate?
I think that the main thing is that there's a diversified funding possibility. And certainly the interest rate is a
It's not a tax-free municipal, is it, for the investor, or
well,
it is?
it is,
Oh, okay, well, there's the advantage.
yeah.
Okay.
And so, there's one other little portion of this that I get to, but then I want to come back to that idea.
Well, let me just, before you do that.
Sure.
So it's a tax-free municipal, but the bond buyers, the bond holders must know that the city is really not behind it as terms of payment, that the bondholders ultimately are relying on either the funding from lot sales or ultimately the funding from the developer in order to get the repayment back.
That's correct.
So there would probably be some interest rate advantage for these bondholders because there's gonna be a higher risk carried with the bonds.
I think that is also correct, and I think that's all part of the portion that William Blair is really expert at in so far as finding that buyer that understands what that risk is.
Well, the rates are certainly gonna be a lot higher than what we pay,
Right.
okay? It's gonna be, still
What,
be a lot
6 or
lower
7?
than what the developer can borrow from the bank at.
There is one other, if you can move to the next slide, there's another portion of this related to the maintenance of these improvements once they're done. The city's responsible for the water and sanitary maintenance as they would be within a development. The one thing that's different in this particular case is that if you recall the project, the road, while it's public, is a paver road, so it's a non-standard road. And the developer agreement will include the provision that the homeowners association, which is the same group of people that would be involved with the special service area, will retain the obligation to maintain the pavers of the road. So there's a portion of it where the city's included a special maintenance tax that will help underwrite that homeowner's obligation. Any other maintenance related to landscaping, snow plowing, those sorts of things are outside of this discussion and are paid through homeowners association dues like any other.
You know, is the
HOA.
SSA going to road infrastructure? Because I thought at one point we thought it couldn't.
At one point, because the road is non-standard in terms of its materials and
Width.
and width, we were not going to be taking it as a public road, and therefore would not have been available for the SSA. Because we're using the maintenance tax, which will allow the city to be responsible for the roads in the ultimate sense, and have the source of those funding, or source of the maintenance funding from the property owners, it will be a public road, and therefore it can be included in the SSA.
Now, the maintenance tax, I assume, is also then, the credit behind that is the homeowners association, and for unsold lots, the developer?
That's correct, and again, that's more of a backstop. The HOA is expected to take care of the work, and only if they were to fail and the city took care of it, the city could then levy the maintenance tax to recover its costs.
Okay.
And that would be a tax no different than what we tax as part of our general levy.
Okay, and we are the ultimate, and we have first position?
We would as a tax, it would be a tax, it would not be a lien.
Okay. But as a tax, I mean, a
Tax,
property
tax,
tax,
yeah,
property tax is
it
a
leaves
lien,
frogs
isn't it?
over any of the mortgage liens and the like, correct.
Okay.
So, you know, that is a review sort of the general mechanics of it. If you have specific questions, like I said, there's other people here. But I wanted to get back, I want to say one other thing, get back to the initial question of why provide a financial tool for this development. And I think that it comes down to whether or not you believe it's good for the city. And do you think that this development, this type of development is good for the city? And I think that the answer is yes. Throughout all the times that we've been up here before the variety of boards, we've confirmed that we know that the city values the preservation of historic structures, embraces the idea of saving the final farm, values the preservation of open space, values the use of forward-thinking green construction, and it's all of these unique aspects that make this particular development good for the city. So if the city wants to encourage this type of development, then there is this opportunity to provide an additional financial tool to help, you know, as a means to do so. You know, and the current economic realities have conspired to bring us to a point in which this is available to us. The benefits to the city are very concrete, considering the substantial impact fees that it will receive. And there is going to be a new product available to the housing market that I think is going to be a positive, or have a positive impact for the city. So with that, I think it's important to remember that this really is without risk to the city. All these benefits without risk. And the alternative is to wait and not do anything, and I don't think that is in the city's better interest. So that's what I have to say.
I have another question, if you would.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I came in a little late, so I didn't get your first name, but,
My name's Craig Pearson.
okay, Craig, nice to meet you. I appreciate your presentation. You know, this isn't exactly a zero-sum game in that when we give a developer an advantage and there are new properties that are put out for sale, 33 beautiful new homes in a lovely environment at a certain price point. With an SSA, those buyers have the opportunity to defer some of that purchase price, as I read this, and to pay the $175,000 charge per home over some period. I think it's 5 years for this. Am I correct so far?
I don't think that that's exactly,
Okay, please correct me, because I thought that's what I read reading the material.
well, perhaps there's additional information I could summon from either Vic or.
I believe that at one point, there was the opportunity to have the SSA taxes continue on the property until they ran their course. I believe, and maybe Mr. Freeberg can answer this a little more specifically, I believe that the plan now is that at closing, from the closing proceeds, the entire tax bill for a particular property going forward will be paid off. So this won't have the price point differential. In my experience, I've also noted that if there is not going to be the payoff at closing, there's usually a notice that's required to the prospective purchaser, so that that's something that can be factored into any kind of negotiation, and it's something we would require up front. So perhaps there can be some clarification on the point from the development team, but I understand that was a shift from what it had been originally contemplated.
And that's also why the establishing ordinances are pushed back to the September hearing, the first and second reading, as
Okay,
opposed to.
If we wouldn't mind getting some clarification on
Sure.
that, whether, and the question as I see it is whether a potential purchaser of one of these parcels must pay the entire purchase price, including the SSA portion, with the closing, or whether any of that can be deferred.
Right. We went to, this is called a pay-down structure, where once the lot is purchased, that amount of the tax goes and just pays off that pro rata portion of bond, rather than have the homeowner, pay the tax for the 30 years. So it's a more conservative way of doing it. That's, in our judgment, we felt this was a better way of doing it. So let's take a typical lot price. If it was $800,000, the $175,000, which is the amount of the tax per lot, would just get paid right away at the closing. So again, we think it's more conservative. It shortens the time down that the bonds would be outstanding. That's also favorable. Then we don't have to think about a homeowner 10 years, 15 years down the road, and is he paying his tax on time, and a more conservative way of doing it.
Okay, because we got, excuse me for asking another question, we got some additional supporting material with the package of information, and one of the items was a report of residential market analysis by Tracy Cross and Associates, and that specifically
Right,
talked
that-
about a 5-year paydown. Is this wrong?
He talked about 5-year absorption of the bonds. Or, in other words, 5-year absorption of the home sales. So it was one per every 2 months. All right,
Stu, you are right, though. It did say in here to retire the SSA separately in 12 annual installments, and clearly
Yeah.
as Blair's gone out to the market.
That is the
determined
point.
that
I
that's-
think,
Excuse me, I got the
It's not
number
workable.
wrong. It's 12 annual installments, so that's no longer on the table as an option for the buyers, is that correct?
correct. It'll come right out at closing.
Why do you do it on a per lot basis of 176,000? I mean, if you've got someone's buying a house at 2.5 million and another person's buying one at 700, you would think you'd prorate it.
Well, it's number of bedroom, the way that there's a study done, it's number of bedrooms, it's water usage, it's front footage, it's
So
a
it's
very
not straight
elaborate study.
176 for everybody? It is or it isn't?
It'll be, the only exception may be the house, the current house.
Okay, so when I look at these prices here, you've got all these different houses listed as prices, as lot summary proposed.
Right.
It shows the 176 for each house. Even though the houses are different sizes, the lots are different sizes. Why do you do it that way as opposed to spreading it,
Because,
prorating it?
because it's the belief of the developer and the other people making the decision that regardless of whether or not my family lives in a 2,000 square foot home or a 5,000 square foot home, we flush the toilet the same number of times.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Tom, you have any information on that?
If you have, 4, 5 people in the house, I mean, that if you're talking about the water and the sewer and the road, it's not gonna, there's not gonna be one house that has 14-car garage and one that has 1-car garage.
Well,
That's
but a bigger house, I mean,
It's good.
I can tell you in my
Let's not
house
go there.
with 7 of us, we use a lot more water, because I've charted this, than other houses around town. I mean,
Well, I think that the difference of these 34 lots, with the exception perhaps of the one large one, is gonna be, is not enough to,
but I would think
to
from a
be
marketing
concerned.
perspective, if you have a house that's 700,000 and you're saying you need to pay an extra 175, that's a lot harder sale than going to someone who's buying $1 million house and saying you have to pay an extra 175.
I believe there are probably 3 reasons to do this. One is that, at least for purposes of planning, one can never tell how many residents will be in a home. And what the IEPA does for permitting sake, when it's a single-family residence, they treat it as simply 3.5 population equivalents, irrespective of the number of people who might live there for both water and sewer. So the water and sewer doesn't vary from a permitting perspective based on the size of the house. Likewise, with the road issue, I think there's a view that there will be a comparable use of the road for each of the homes. So when we're looking at the various improvements, there's rough proportionality among them on a per lot basis. A second consideration is that with a special service area, if you do it on an ad valorem basis, you create a nobody wants to move first situation, because they all start as vacant lots with a relatively low EAV. The first one to build is suddenly going to be disproportionately higher, and when it is, you then find yourself paying a disproportionate amount of taxes, even though everyone will end up getting the same benefit. So the special tax roll approach avoids that problem. And I think the third issue is that you're not really going to get that differential, because it's going to be paid at closing. It's going to be built into the lot price under either circumstance, the more expensive or the less expensive house, and it'll just be paid at closing. So I think that there's a reasonable justification for the per lot basis of assigning the tax costs, and then there are some practical aspects that go along with that to make that a more effective way of marketing the property. Otherwise, you do get the who goes first problem.
But I know there's some special tax breaks that this property gets because of the winery. Are those gonna be just a per lot tax break?
Tom,
Or the larger property's gonna get a higher tax break?
No, I think the larger lot will pay a little more, clearly. A 14,000 square foot lot will pay less than the 25,000 square foot lot on just the land portion. But we philosophically felt that everybody's sharing equally in the proceeds of the wine. They each own the winery equally. And so to kind of split hairs, I mean, who's really benefiting more on the road? And keep in mind, the road function, operations, and long-term maintenance is really responsibility of the homeowners association.
Right.
So typically after 15 years, Ramesh will tell you, you grind down that road and repave it. In this case, it's really the homeowner's obligation. If there's any deflection or settlement issues, those are bore by the homeowners. We feel that, Joe, who lives in Florida, who may have the largest lot, is there a third of the year, and he may be paying more. So it just seemed to be more of a fair and equitable way to deal with that.
I mean, I don't think it necessarily matters from our perspective, it's just interesting to me from a marketing perspective. I mean, it makes the smaller lots probably a little harder to sell, and the larger lots a little easier to sell.
I had another question. In the materials that we received, I guess this was the June 7th meeting when we talked about this, there was a statement that the developer would be posting all required financial guarantees with the city prior to recording of the plat to assure completion of public infrastructure. I thought I read something, and now I just can't put my fingers on it, that for this recent conversation said that the developer would be posting guarantees for everything except for the SSA. and I regret that I can't find out exactly where it was that I put that. Kathy, I don't know if you,
I believe, I won't tell you where it is either, but I know that it is in those materials.
okay, so why?
For the, I was going to say, for the non-SSA improvements, public and private, those will have to be conventionally secured with either a letter of credit or appropriate bond. For the SSA improvements, that's the water, sewer, road, some of the roadway landscaping, those are going to be paid for by the SSA. The SSA monies will be available. We understand that that work is all gonna be done in a relatively condensed period of time and will be completed before the payouts are to occur. So there will be security the whole time to make sure that the work is done. I believe, Craig, that's still the program, is that not?
Correct. Which is why I think I included 2 or 3 times that all of the money for the infrastructure is available and for the entire cost of it.
The rating agency question, I don't know if William Blair can speak to that. We obviously need to talk to the rating agencies and hear them, but I'd be interested if, from your experience, whether rating agencies, when
Sure.
they will turn around.
We work a lot with special service area bonds all across Illinois, Missouri, Indiana as well. And they don't look at, what's going on with special service area as far as affecting the credit rating of the village, of the city.
Okay.
All right? And same is true about capacity, in other words, bond capacity. We have the question here of bank qualified, but this year that was liberalized in Congress. But that doesn't, if you wanted to issue whatever number of bonds you were regularly issuing, that would not affect that.
Okay, and from the, I guess, following up on that bank qualified, because that was my second question, I know this year we don't have an issue with it.
Correct.
Is your expectation that these bonds will be issued by the end of the year?
Yes,
Okay,
certainly.
because we may, unless the government extends it, we might have an issue with it next year.
Yeah, and we've had extended discussions with the development team, and I think everybody realizes that they must be before 12/31 if this is going to work.
City made that perfectly clear, early on.
Are they gonna be issued as bank qualified?
Yes.
And you expect at what rating?
The special service area bonds will be non-rated,
Non-rated?
right? It's the nature of the bond.
Okay.
33 lots, not 700 lots, to give you an example.
And what rate do you expect?
It'll, should be in the high sixes, right around 7%.
In term?
We're going to use a 30-year term here, and, but be cognizant of, as the lots sell, they'll be paid down. So if it's true what Tracy Cross says, the bonds will be extinguished within a 5-year period.
But they, if you had one lot that didn't sell, it could literally stay out for 30 years?
All right, we have a provision in the bonds, a debt service reserve, that's equal to about 4 lot sales. So if we got down to the end, right, and we had 1 lot left, we just use that debt service reserve, pay off the bonds.
Okay.
We had 4 lots left, use the debt service reserve and pay that off. It's a safety valve that's built in, and that's one of the purposes for it.
Well, when everything's over and done, and you step back and look at the final numbers that a developer is facing with an SSA like this and without an SSA, is the ultimate effect that the profitability of the project to the developer is enhanced with an SSA as opposed to not having an SSA?
If you're using the 30-year structure where the homeowner is, continuing to pay, there can be an additional enhancement for the developer. With pay-down bonds, it's a wash.
Explain that to me, please, if you would.
Because the pay-down, the bonds are being paid off by that 175 right at the lot sale, there's really not the opportunity for the developer to be passing on the tax for 30 years to a home buyer.
Well,
you know, where there
that
can be a
assumes
difference.
that assumes the developer could take the SSA proceeds and borrow it from a bank. If the developer had to put that up as equity, it would have a big difference in the
That-
IRR of the project.
That's correct too.
Okay, so I think your answer is yes.
Yes. And give me some numbers, if you would, please. The $7 million that we're talking about is what percentage of the entire project cost? If you know, anybody?
It's a little less than
Right. The, two ways of looking at it, the materials, we require an appraisal, right? And then, obviously, that's the current land value. And that ratio is about 2.5 to 1. Based on the sales price, it's, of each lot, it's about 4 to 1 ratio. In other words, value of the lot versus the 175. So those are rough numbers. The actual development costs 23 million, right? 7 million versus 23 would be 3 and a fraction.
Okay, thank you. That's the number I was looking for.
Okay.
Other questions?
A very nuts and bolts
Sure.
question. And, you know, assuming this was passed and success also to Tom on this if this occurs, but if I was gonna be buying a home or buying a lot from the developer and the SSA value's on there and I'm financing it, can I gain a mortgage that would attach on the value of this, or would this have to be paid independently, or how's that affect the land values? Is it,
But if we were using the other approach where it was, the homeowner was basically keeping the 175 in effect,
right,
then what you're saying, you know, becomes a factor. But when it's paid down at closing, it would not affect what he does with his mortgage, you know, or his valuation.
but bank goes out and they appraise the land value and they appraise the home value. Would this tax be something that would be plausible to finance by someone who is attempting to purchase the lot, or is it a tax that you couldn't possibly finance?
It's
And you
not,
have to-
it's not really a tax, it's just, I mean, if the money was borrowed from a bank,
Okay.
right? If the 7 million was borrowed from a bank, it would be the same thing, as if he sold a lot, he would have to pay back the equivalent amount to the bank. So,
Okay.
I think when the property is listed, it's gonna be listed as a sale price of, with that built in there, and that's what the bank's gonna look at it as. So,
True
I
market
don't
price.
think it's gonna have any effect on
The land value?
the land value.
Okay.
But is paying down an SSA something that a mortgage is allowed to do? I think that's your question.
Yeah,
But they're not paying off the SSA, technically, the developer is.
Oh,
okay.
okay. All right.
Other questions?
Just, I would just hope to get some documentation prior to us doing final action here.
Certainly.
I'd love to look at
That's
the
expected and-
indenture. Perhaps Laura knows what the list is, sources and uses. Be nice to have a letter from S&P and Moody's affirming your statement about not impacting the credit rating.
All right, we'll talk to them.
Thank you.
That might be something we have to get from.
Right. No, I
From
just, we
Moody's.
just need to do that.
Actually, I have one question. I don't know, Craig, if this is for you or not, but under our current city policy, we do not accept public improvements until 50% of the lots are sold and built on. And I don't know how this is structured, but I'm not sure that can, I think that might gum up the works, I guess is the best way of putting it.
Well, I know that Vic and I anticipated that, and when we met on, at the end of June, we discussed that would be addressed either through the developer agreement or otherwise. So it's something that we're aware of.
Okay.
And I don't mean to speak for you, Vic, but I think that that's correct.
Yeah, our only concern and the reason the policy's in place is because, and I think under the report that was included in the packet, they were talking about potentially a 5-year build-out. And
part of the concern is if that takes a longer period of time, it starts to damage the road after the city has taken them over. And then therefore, the city then has to step in and improve roads, sewers, curbs, and so forth. And so the intent there is to try and put more of that responsibility on the developer to maintain that, and we only take it over when the likelihood of potential future damage is limited.
Right, and I think that we also help address that because the homeowners association is gonna retain the obligation for the road throughout. So if the development and the construction damages the road, the city isn't gonna be responsible for that anyway.
If I might ask bond counsel Laura Bailes to come up, because she came all this way, I wouldn't want to have her and I have to say anything tonight. But I think she would also be able to affirm, I believe that we will need to vary our standard about the 50% of the lots sold in order to have these qualified for the SSA. Is that correct, Laura?
That is correct if we want to structure it the way we've structured other SSAs with municipalities. There are two ways really you could structure it. One would be where the developer finances all of the improvements, and then when they're ready to convey everything over to the municipality, it's basically structured like an acquisition, and that's not what we were talking about in our prior discussions. What we had talked about was having a development agreement whereby as the construction was being made, there'd be inspections by the city's engineer, and if the work that had been completed was satisfactory, then there would be a draw request that would be approved by the engineer and by the city, and you could draw down proceeds of the bonds once that approval occurred. But I think it was the developer's understanding that they wouldn't wait necessarily until 50% had been, and maybe I'm wrong, but I had thought that you weren't going to wait until 50% had been sold out in order to initiate that process.
Right, that is how we understood it. We have had conversations with the engineering department, and I think on the one hand with the roads and the landscaping and the like, since it's going to be the HOA that's got responsibility and we have the backstop of the maintenance tax, we end up in a unchanged position. The one question was with the water and sewer lines, since those are things that we would be responsible for maintaining. But I believe and Ramesh, maybe you can help me out here. I believe with the water and sewer, those are things that we take on right away when they're completed?
Right, usually 2-year maintenance.
Yeah, so we have a maintenance period, but we will have the security for the maintenance period. That's something the developer will have to do, but we do take those on at the outset, because once anybody's there to turn on the water or to flush the toilets, those are our lines.
Right.
So we're trying to keep it as close to standard as possible. The one difference here is that the city will have to take the road title earlier, but we also won't be taking on the maintenance responsibilities at all, except as a backstop, and then with the homeowners paying for it.
Other comments or questions? Thank you very much for coming in, we appreciate it. Thank you.
I have a general, not for anybody here, but I know we're running
Okay.
late. At the last meeting, we discussed the fact that we can do this because we have the bond room, and that we may have some room next year, we may not. And if 4 projects came up, I thought at this follow-up meeting, we were gonna discuss the criteria by which we would determine which SSAs would be acceptable or not, first come, first serve, best project, and that wasn't here tonight. Did we do that at a different time, or? Because I think with this one being, hopefully successful for.
I think the direction, if I might add, was, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Plan Commission is taking that issue up and making a recommendation to the city council.
Very good,
Number
okay.
one, and I don't know if it's gonna be at their next meeting or September, Plan Commission meeting, but at the Finance Committee meeting in November, when we talk about capital improvements, we will also give you more of a long-range picture in terms of what your capacity is, that we would even be able to consider some, because if the state or the federal government goes back to just $10 million a year, we may not have much of a window to even offer this to future developments. But we'll have both of those ready for you in the fall.
Thanks.
Well, does the, if we were to approve the proposing ordinance at this point, how does that impact our view of the Plan Commission recommendation that we might get in September? Does that mean that we still have the right to reconsider this proposing ordinance before we pass final ordinance. If we get information from the plan commission that says, hey, you may only have 10 million and you really need to figure out your prioritization of that money.
Well, but
Stu,
we have,
Well,
This year, it's not an issue.
This year's not an issue.
This year, it's not an issue at all.
because it's
It's for future
And no one
years.
else is asking.
Right.
It's for future years that we would have to consider that.
Thank
And I think as we talked about at the last go-around with this, the real question for you all is, as a policy matter, is this something that we as a city are willing to do for this particular development? And I think that's the only issue here, because we don't have some of the constraints that we are likely to have in the future. And I think that the policy that the Plan Commission is gonna be discussing will be trying to look at it in light of those expected constraints.
I think if the language reflects that, the uniqueness of this first and current situation, then it wouldn't affect the Plan Commission's common sense direction going forward.
Right, and again, I think when this first came up in the manner that's been presented tonight, several of the key factors were that the development does have unique characteristics in terms of the green nature of it, bless you, the low density nature of it, the maintenance of the agricultural component of it, as well as the homeowner primary responsibility and the use of the maintenance tax, and therefore not having the city bear the cost for non-standard improvements.
no problem. Other comments? Thank you again. We're gonna skip, Bob, should we skip Gordon for now? I know the mayor's gonna have some comments on it. Okay.
And if we need to, we can talk about it during the meeting.
Okay.
You might want to, the Public Works Committee talked about the capital items earlier. You got a few minutes, they're on the consent agenda, but maybe they could report on it.
Like to take a look at that. We have a number of items in the area of equipment that we're purchasing. I think we got a separate sheet here on that, a current one.
Yeah, revised sheet.
Revised sheet. We should all have that. And we're looking at, getting some new squad cars, some other equipment, including, a tractor, a chipper, and also with that, a new boiler for the police and fire station. They all came in with the bidding process. We had certain products that we were looking for in our specs, as noted under the police cars, that Bill Jacobs Chevrolet submitted a bid that did not meet the particular specifications and therefore could not be included with it. You'll see some others with that also, but it was an open bidding process. We were very careful in our request for equipment that would fit our needs in the city based on our previous experience, as well as with the companies supplying it, that they would be able to provide the maintenance and follow through with the equipment when we purchased it. Are there any questions on anything that's there? It's pretty straightforward.
Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, we're staying with Impala Chevrolets till they stop making them. Then we'll have to make another decision, but it works out very well in getting the same vehicle, because there's so much equipment that we move from squad car to squad car that it will automatically fit in, and it's not refitting the cars together every time we make a change. And they've handled well.
I looked at these, they look fine. I know that it's always a challenge when it comes to equipment, because you get used to equipment, and you get used to a certain brand, and then people think one was better than the other, and then we're trying to have competitive open bidding. And it's always a tension there to try and make sure that we have a specification so that we're getting apples and apples.
Well, that was.
And we have to waive, sometimes you have to waive technical things to keep apples and apples. So I know you keep that in mind, so with that said, I'll be happy to support this.
Good.
Good.
Thank
We
you.
were thinking of you while we did it.
Because we spent a lot of
Yeah,
time.
I like the redrafted memo, because that was, I did leave Mr. Thomas a message today at 10 to 5, although he must have been out of the office by then.
We'd already handled it.
We already
Yeah.
took care of it.
So,
So, good for you.
good, so that will, clears that up. Anything
So,
else?
thank you.
Other business, we saw a flash report today.
Yeah, wow.
What?
I like that.
Well,
Is it
clearly
a-
we're selling a lot of real estate. I don't know what,
What-
I don't know if we have any insights on what
foreclosed.
that happened. Hopefully for Mr. Swarthout, that will continue. Was there any reason for the, I can't believe we had too many houses that qualified for the federal income tax benefit.
I think everyone that sold.
I mean, just
No
as a,
specific reason, just that we are definitely busier, both in building permits, and in home sales. A lot of inspection requests and, I think probably prices coming down a little bit and it being a buyer's market.
That was good. Sales,
just for the viewer's perspective, we, in 2 months, have 25% of what we collected all of last year on the real estate transfer tax, so that's good news.
that's good. You know, other, sales tax was a little light, although this is about a 4-month lag. And water revenues are doing fine, and my understanding from the city manager and Michael Thomas is that we've had a banner 3 weeks of pumping
July.
water, of July, so.
And it should continue.
It should continue, given the sun's. Yeah, well, the sun's back out, so.
Tomatoes.
Opportunity for the public to address the finance committee on, finance committee items? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adjourn so we can start what's gonna be a long council meeting right on time.
So moved.
Second. All those in favor? Finance committee meeting is closed. Council meeting at 7:30.
Good job, Mr. Chairman, you kept to the time frame.